Welcome to the Story Atelier, where stories are not just told, but felt deep in the quiet corners of your soul. What you're about to witness today isn't just about a man and his dog. It's about what remains when everything else is taken away. In a world obsessed with spotlight and showmanship, this story gently reminds us that the most powerful truths often walk in silence, beside us loyal, unseen, and unshaken. Stay with us through every moment of this tale, because within it lies a lesson so deep, so universal, that by the end, you may find yourself seeing the world and your place in it just a little differently. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, help the Story Atelier reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support is the quiet applause that fuels every word we write. September in Virginia hadn't fully surrendered to autumn yet. The heat still clung to the air like a memory that wouldn't let go. But if you look closely, you'd see it. The first hint of gold touching the outer leaves of the old oaks lining the road. Down a gravel path at the edge of the woods sat a small house, weathered and quiet, tucked into a patch of shadow, like it belonged more to the trees than the people. There was no nameplate, no picket fence, just an old wooden bench on the porch and a pair of watchful eyes, one human, one canine, looking down the road as if expecting something that had never quite arrived. Shadow, the dog, wasn't the kind that turned heads in magazines. One ear drooped from an old scar, and his coat was patchy in places, darker around his shoulders like smoke-stained wool. But his eyes, deep and still like a lake before the storm, were the only place Walter Gray had found peace since the war. Walter didn't talk much. He'd long stopped trying to explain the silence he carried inside him. But when Shadow laid his head on Walter's knee during the long, restless nights, that silence didn't feel so empty anymore. They didn't need words between them. There was something older than language that bound them together. Something forged in fire and noise, and the kind of loss that rewrites who you are. Life passed quietly on the edge of Claiborne County. Walter lived by routine, by rhythm, by the way the light changed on the porch at different times of day. Shadow followed him everywhere, never ahead, never behind, always beside. They'd become a rhythm, too, until one Saturday afternoon, when Mrs. Millie from down the road brought over a flyer from town. Annual Claiborne County Dog Showcase. All breeds welcome. Come share your story with your four-legged friend. She said, "You should go. Folks need to see something real, not just poodles and tutus." Walter half smiled. "We're not exactly performers." Millie raised an eyebrow. "Then show them something that doesn't need to be performed." He left the flyer on the kitchen counter for 3 days, untouched. But the morning after that, while he was pouring his coffee, Shadow walked over and gently placed a paw on his boot, the way he always did when he sensed Walter was lost in his head, as if to say, "If you go, I go." Walter sighed. "We're not made for crowds, you and me." Shadow said nothing. He never needed to. Claiborne's town hall wasn't big, but was crowded enough to make a man like Walter feel out of place. He walked in slowly, Shadow at his side. No leash, no banner, no handler, no polished boots. Just an old soldier and a dog who had seen too much. Everywhere around them were bright smiles, shiny fur, and glitzy collars. Dogs trotted past like fashion models. Owners laughed, exchanged grooming tips. A handler in a lavender suit practiced a routine with a golden retriever jumping through hula hoops. Walter didn't belong. Shadow didn't sparkle. One judge glanced at him, then immediately assumed he was in the wrong place. "Spectator seating's over there, sir." Walter replied quietly, "We're registered to participate." There was a flicker of surprise, then a shrug, then the clipboard. They were signed and mispronounced and misfiled. One woman pulled her miniature dog away with a whisper. "Looks dangerous." Shadow didn't even blink. They found a spot on the far edge of the room. No one greeted them. No one asked their story. No cameras turned their way. In a room full of tales and tricks, they were ghosts. Walter wondered, briefly, if he should have stayed home, on the porch, with the quiet. Then Shadow shifted, gently leaned into his leg, not asking, not comforting, just reminding him, "I'm here. Don't forget." The lights inside Claiborne Town Hall weren't like any light Walter was used to. They weren't warm like sunlight through the oaks outside his home, or gentle like firelight curling in a winter hearth. They were cold, bright in a way that made every wrinkle on his face and every old scar on Shadow's body feel like something to be stared at, not understood. Shadow walked beside him, step by measured step, as if sensing that every footfall cost Walter something between muscle and memory. No one stopped them, but no one welcomed them either. Around them, the air glittered with leashes of rhinestones and polished fur. Perfumed dogs strutted like showpieces, handlers gliding beside them in crisp suits and coordinated smiles. Cameras flashed. Someone laughed too loudly. It felt like walking into a room that wasn't just full, but closed. Walter and Shadow didn't belong. That was clear. A man in a maroon suit with a clipboard glanced up, frowning. "Spectators are to the left, sir." "I'm a participant," Walter said. A flicker of surprise crossed the man's face. "Oh, right. Sign-ins are at the back table. Please be quick. We're in the main rounds now." The registration table was as cold as the light above it. The young woman behind it didn't look up as she scribbled down his name and got Shadow's name wrong, even though Walter had spelled it carefully. As they stepped away, a woman in high heels pulled her fluffy Pomeranian close and muttered, "Looks aggressive." Walter said nothing. Shadow didn't even twitch an ear. They found a place to sit near the far wall, where the spotlights couldn't reach. No greetings. No glances, just pockets of people in groups, exchanging small talk and tips like they belonged to some private club of sparkles and smiles. Walter sat quietly. Shadow rested at his feet, calm but alert. They were used to being invisible, but it still ached in some distant place behind the ribs. He caught a glimpse of himself reflected in a display case across the room. The limp, the patched jacket, the dog with half a dozen scars and no-show collar. He looked like a mistake. Then he felt it, that quiet pressure against his boot. Shadow's head, leaning in, not seeking comfort, but offering it. "I'm here," it said. "Still here?" Two teenage boys walked by. One laughed at something on his phone, then nudged the other and nodded at Walter's limp. "He looks like he just rolled out of a nursing home." The other snorted. Walter didn't turn. He'd heard worse. Much worse. He'd heard it in VA offices, in interview rooms, in the voice of a young officer once telling him, "We appreciate your service, but we're looking for someone more agile." A man in a flashy green tracksuit passed them, glanced at Shadow, and scoffed loud enough to hear. Thought this was a show, not a PTSD therapy circle. Walter kept his eyes forward, but Shadow shifted just slightly and pressed his head harder into Walter's shin, like he was saying, "Let it go. They don't know, but we do." On the main stage, the show was in full swing. A border collie executed a precise figure-8 pattern to a burst of applause. A sleek husky leapt through glowing rings. Handlers bowed and waved as if auditioning for late-night television. The MC's voice boomed from the speakers like a game show host. Walter watched from the sidelines, one hand resting on Shadow's back. This wasn't just a dog showcase. It was theater, spectacle, glitter with a leash. He looked around. He didn't see a single scar, not on the dogs, not on the people. Then a man in a tailored suit approached. Clipboard, polished shoes, a rehearsed smile. "Sir," he began, "we try to keep the tone here uplifting. Friendly. Are you sure this is the kind of event you want to be part of?" Walter just looked at him. One long, steady look. The man coughed, stepped back. "Right. Sorry. I'll go check another table." All of it began to press in, like the weight in his chest the first time a doctor told him he might never walk again, like the silence in those cold VA waiting rooms where no one ever said what they really meant. He looked down at his boots, old, worn, dependable, the same boots that walked him out of the fire, with Shadow at his side. Then it happened. Shadow lifted one paw, scarred rough, and gently placed it on Walter's foot. Their eyes met. That was all it took. Walter took a breath. A long, careful breath. "We'll show them why you're here," he whispered. His voice caught a little. Shadow's tail gave one soft thump. That was their language. No need for trophies. No need for approval. Because some stories don't need applause. They just need a moment. And theirs was coming. There was no fanfare, no music, no flash of spotlight. Just the MC stumbling over names he didn't care to pronounce. Up next, Mr. Walter Gray and Schooner. Shadow. His name was Shadow. But Walter didn't correct him. It didn't matter now. The ones who needed to remember already did. Not the name, but the way this dog made them feel. They stepped forward. No leash. No choreography. No ribbons. Just a man whose steps carried a quiet weight, and a dog whose stillness said more than any routine ever could. No one clapped. A few people glanced at their phones. A couple of murmurs broke out in the back. Is this part of the show? They must have misread the schedule. Walter and Shadow reached the center of the arena. The bright lights cast a soft ring around them. Uninvited, indifferent, they stood together like two shadows returned from a place no one wanted to acknowledge. Walter leaned slightly toward Shadow and whispered one word. Ready. Shadow stepped forward, not quickly, not dramatically. One slow step. Then another. He paused, nose to the ground, sniffing. Not like a show dog looking for cues. More like a soldier in old boots, tracing something only he could smell. Then, without signal, without sound, Shadow turned sharply and ran straight for Walter. Walter dropped to his knees, and Shadow threw himself over his handler. Not playfully, not like a dog seeking belly rubs, but like a shield. In that moment, the arena vanished. All that glitz, all those polished routines, they evaporated. In their place, a dusty road in the middle of a burning nowhere. Fire in the air. Screams behind a wall of smoke. The crunch of twisted metal and the silence that comes when you're not sure if you're alive or already gone. That was where Shadow found him. And that was what he was showing them now. Not a trick. A memory. Walter's voice, low and gravelly, broke the silence. He found me like this. Buried 3 days under a wrecked transport truck. I couldn't move. I didn't know if I was breathing, but he stayed. He brought back a radio. Wouldn't let anyone near unless he knew they were safe. No one moved. No one cheered. No one dared to. A little girl in the second row wiped her eyes. An older man removed his cap and held it over his chest. A woman lowered her phone, slowly, as if ashamed she ever raised it. Shadow remained perfectly still on top of Walter. This wasn't obedience. This wasn't performance. This was instinct. This was love. This was remembering. Walter didn't stir. He let Shadow stay there, as if just this once he still needed protection, not from bombs, but from the kind of judgment that comes wrapped in politeness. The arena was full, but all anyone heard was the sound of their own breath. Then slowly, Walter pushed himself up, brushing off his knees. Not for show, but out of habit. Shadow rose too, steady as ever, and moved back to his place beside him. They didn't bow, didn't wave. They simply walked away. A single clap echoed through the silence. Then another, then 3. And suddenly, the room erupted, not with the tidy applause reserved for trick routines, but with something deeper. Messier, real, the kind of applause that doesn't reward technique. It honors truth. Backstage, the judges exchanged glances. One whispered, that wasn't a routine. Another frowned, pen tapping the scorecard. We can't score sentiment. A third spoke coldly, too emotional, felt like a stunt. Walter didn't hear the words, but he saw the faces. He knew those faces. He'd seen them in debrief rooms, in job interviews, in the brief nods of people who say, thank you for your service, but never offer you a seat at the table. Shadow nudged his hand. Walter looked down and smiled. Good boy, he said softly. Shadow sighed. One wag of the tail. They weren't here for medals. They'd already proven everything. Without a single bark. The applause still lingered in the rafters of the hall. But like all things that come from the heart, it eventually faded. Not from forgetfulness, but from reverence. Walter and Shadow returned to their corner seat, tucked along the far wall where the shadows had always welcomed them. The lights dimmed. The MC regained his composure, and the next dog and handler pair took the stage. The show went on, but something in the room had shifted. Walter sat without speaking. Shadow curled beside his leg, resting his head lightly on Walter's boot, his breathing steady, always steady. No part of their body language asked for praise. They had never needed it. But Walter could feel it, the watching, not from everyone, but from enough. Backstage, it was different. Not quiet, but tight, heavy with the scent of judgment. The judges had gathered like a jury trying to make sense of a verdict that didn't come from their hands. A woman in a crimson blazer leaned over her notes. There was no technical structure, no commands. It wasn't a legitimate performance. A man in wire-rimmed glasses muttered. It felt emotional, too emotional, like it was planned to manipulate. Another added coldly, "We don't award trauma." There was a silence after that, brief but sharp like a door closing. Walter couldn't hear their words, but he knew the tone. He'd heard it in quiet VA offices where polite phrases masked indifference, in job interviews where hands were shaken but never followed up, in grocery store lines where people smiled without looking. He didn't need to hear it. He'd lived it. And Shadow knew too. The dog shifted closer, as if shielding Walter not from bullets this time, but from the weight of being overlooked again. Then came the sound of a cane tapping lightly against tile. A man stood up near the fourth row, one no one had noticed before. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of strong that doesn't need to be loud. He wore an old Marine Corps cap, faded from sun and sweat, but unmistakable. He walked toward the front, not with hesitation, but with the calm authority of someone used to being heard. When he spoke, the entire hall fell silent. "My name is James Holston, retired colonel, United States Marine Corps." People turned. Some gasped. A few stood instinctively, not because of who he was, but because of what he carried with him, the kind of presence that doesn't ask for permission. He looked directly at the judges. "I've seen a lot of military dogs. Trained ones, brilliant ones, but only one pulled his handler from a burning Humvee, held the line for 6 hours, and laid across that man's body until help arrived, refusing to leave his side even when the enemy came close. That dog is sitting right there." He pointed at Shadow. "And if you think a ribbon means more than that, you're in the wrong room." The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was recognition, the kind that comes not from understanding, but from suddenly remembering what matters. The MC swallowed hard. The clipboard slipped slightly from his fingers. Someone in the press box began scribbling. A photographer quietly raised her lens. Colonel Holston stepped down and walked toward Walter. He extended his hand. "Son, I don't care what those judges write on their little cards. What you and that dog showed in there, that's legacy. That's what these shows should be about." Walter shook his hand, firm, both hands, a gesture older than words. "Appreciate it, sir," Walter murmured. Holston gave a nod. "Don't thank me. Thank him." Walter looked down. Shadow's eyes met his. The tail gave 2 soft taps. He knew. The whispers backstage changed, shifted, became something new. Who is that dog? Why hadn't we heard that story before? Is it real? The answer, of course, was yes. And for the first time in a long time, people started asking the right questions. Walter didn't seek the crowd. He didn't smile for the cameras. But he felt something settle in his chest, a warmth he hadn't known he'd missed. To be seen, not pitted, not decorated, just seen. Truly, he hadn't come for recognition, but it had found him anyway, and it came from someone who knew the weight of sacrifice. By the time the crowd thinned and the lights began to dim, Walter and Shadow found themselves back outside, on the bench near the gravel parking lot, under a flickering street lamp that didn't seem sure whether it wanted to stay lit. Walter held the wooden plaque in his lap, fingers tracing the engraving slowly, as if trying to memorize it not with his eyes, but with his hands. For service, loyalty, and love beyond training. Shadow, hero without command. Shadow lay at his feet, still and calm. Not asleep, just waiting like always. Watching. Walter didn't speak. Not because he had nothing to say, but because some victories aren't meant to be spoken, only held. Quietly. He heard footsteps. Soft, cautious. He looked up to see a woman, and a boy walking toward him. Slow, unsure, like approaching something sacred. The woman had dark hair pulled into a low twist. Her shoulders were squared in that way people learn. When life demands, they carry more than their share. The boy was maybe 12 or 13. Slim, hood pulled up over most of his face, eyes cast down. They didn't wear uniforms. They didn't carry flags. But Walter knew their walk. They were a family war had touched. The woman stopped a few feet away. "Excuse me, Mr. Gray?" Walter nodded. "I'm Karen. This is my son, Mason. My husband came back from Afghanistan last year. He's alive, but he's not really back. Mason hasn't talked much since then. Not really. Not to anyone." She paused. Her hands were folded tightly at her waist. Her voice trembled a little. "But tonight, when you and Shadow were in the ring, Mason whispered something for the first time in weeks. He looked at your dog and said, 'That's like Dad's dog before everything changed.'" Walter felt something press at the base of his throat. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Karen knelt beside her son and gave him a gentle nudge. Mason hesitated. Then he stepped forward. He didn't say a word. He simply reached out slowly and placed his trembling hand on Shadow's head. Shadow didn't move, didn't blink. Just let the boy touch him, lean into him, sit beside him like it was the most natural thing in the world. After a long silence, Mason whispered, barely audible, "He's a good dog." Walter looked away, not because he was ashamed, but because sometimes tears deserve their own privacy. Karen rose, eyes damp. "Thank you for tonight, for being here. You didn't just tell a story. You gave someone else permission to begin theirs again." Walter looked at her, voice thick. "We weren't planning to tell anything, but I guess he still is." He looked down at Shadow. The dog looked up, tail giving a soft, single wag. A few minutes later, a woman with a notepad approached. She was young, not pushy, dressed like someone who asked more questions than she answered. "Hi, I'm Ellie, from the Claiborne Chronicle. I know you probably hate attention, but would you mind if I wrote about you? Not a fluff piece. The real story. The one people need." Walter hesitated, then nodded. "As long as it's not about the war," he said. "Make it about him." Ellie smiled. "It already is." The lights of the arena finally shut off. One by one, the parking lot emptied. But Walter and Shadow stayed seated. Not because they were waiting, but because, for the first time in a long time, they didn't need to move to be seen. They had stopped being walked past. And in the quiet that followed, something new had begun. The morning sun spread softly across the gravel road that led into Claiborne, golden, steady, and unhurried, just like it had for decades. But to Walter, it felt different now. Not because the light had changed, but because something inside him had. He rose early like always, brewed his coffee, checked the laces on his boots, then ran his hand gently down Shadow's back, where the fur was coarse in places, soft in others, worn smooth by time and touch. "Walk?" he asked. Shadow didn't answer, never had to, but his eyes, as always, knew before Walter finished a word. They walked their usual path through town, the one that curved past a bakery with its curling ribbons of sweet air, past a hardware store, the barber shop, and the corner lot where old dogs and older men sat in lawn chairs. But today, things were different. People waved. A jogger slowed, not to tie his shoe, but to say, "Hey, saw you last night." That was something else. At the bus stop, a woman juggling two toddlers gave a soft smile. "You're the man from the paper. Your dog, he's a real one." Walter just nodded. But what he noticed more than the words was how they looked at Shadow, not with fear, not with pity, but with something close to reverence. At the park, the grass was damp with morning dew. Shadow walked slower than usual, not from age, but from a kind of weight that came after being seen. Near the swings, a girl in a deep purple coat broke from her group and marched toward them, boots thumping, eyes curious, fearless the way only children can be. "What's his name?" she asked. "Shadow," Walter replied. She tilted her head. "Like the dark behind you?" "Yeah," he said. Because he's always with me, even when I thought I was alone. She knelt down, hand out. Walter opened his mouth to offer the usual. He's a little shy. But before he could, Shadow had already leaned into her hand, gentle, still, present. He looks like he understands everything, the girl whispered. He does, Walter said, and meant it. That day people came, not to gawk, not to congratulate, but to sit. An older woman brought a photograph of herself beside a war dog from 1968. A father and son placed flowers beneath the bench. No explanation. A young man left a sketch. Charcoal lines capturing the moment Shadow had shielded Walter in the ring. No one asked what tricks Shadow could do. They just wanted to be near him. And sometimes they stayed long enough to begin healing. Walter didn't keep count of how many strangers had found their way to that quiet bench, or how many stories had been shared, not in full, but in pieces. Nods, tears, silence. But he knew what had brought them. Not a performance, not a headline, but a presence. That weekend, the local paper ran another piece. Not about the contest, not about winners or ribbons, but about a man and his dog who taught a town how to listen again. The photo on the front page wasn't polished. A little blurry, light uneven, but it showed Shadow resting his head on Walter's boot, eyes open, tail still. It told the truth. Walter didn't buy the paper, but he saw it in others' hands, on cafe tables, in mailboxes, on someone's dashboard, folded carefully like a keepsake. And he knew they understood, not the war, but the way love can stay, even after everything else leaves. That night, Walter placed a plaque on the mantel, next to an old pair of military boots and Shadow's first collar. He didn't frame it. He didn't need to. It belonged there naturally, like it had always been waiting for that spot. Later, sitting beside the fireplace, Walter looked at Shadow. "We didn't win anything," he said. Shadow blinked slowly, tail brushing the floor once. "But I guess we didn't come for that, did we?" The days after the showcase drifted by like the quiet river behind Walter's house. Not rushed, not loud, but always moving. And with each passing day, more people found their way to the small house at the end of the gravel road. They didn't come with trophies. They didn't bring flowers. They came because somewhere deep inside, they had been reminded of something they'd forgotten. Connection. One veteran showed up just to stand quietly and look at Shadow for 5 minutes, then nodded and left without saying a word. A young mother came with her daughter, holding a folded comic book. She wants to show Shadow the superhero she drew. An elderly man brought an old photo, him and his K9 partner in black and white, taken in hue in 1968. In the photo, the man looked a lot like Walter. They didn't ask questions. They didn't expect anything back. They just wanted to sit. And somehow, standing up afterward felt a little lighter. Walter still made his coffee every morning, still tied his boots with care, still watched the light change across the porch. But now, other chairs have been added, old ones, donated by neighbors, and folks sat with him. Some brought stories. Some brought silence. No one was asked why, because here, no one had to explain why they came. One golden afternoon, Walter heard the sound of bike tires crunching gravel. It was Mason, the boy who once hadn't spoken a word. This time, he came alone. He parked his bike, removed his helmet, and walked straight to Shadow. Shadow rose, ears forward, already recognizing the boy's presence before his feet hit the steps. Mason sat down in the grass, pulled a small sandwich bag from his backpack. Inside was a broken cookie. He didn't feed it to Shadow. He just placed it beside him like a gift, an offering. Dad started walking the dog again. Mason said. Walter nodded. "That's good. And yesterday, I told my friend about Shadow." "What did your friend say?" He asked if Shadow could do tricks. "What did you say?" Mason grinned, eyes squinting in the afternoon sun. "I said, no, but he stays when everybody else leaves." No one taught Mason that sentence. But Walter knew. When a child understands the meaning of presence, of staying, the world becomes just a little bit better. The following week, the regional paper ran another story. The veteran at the end of the road. and the dog that taught a town to listen again. It wasn't sensational. It wasn't viral. It was honest. A collection of small things people used to miss. An old man who no longer had to stand alone at the grocery store. A dog once labeled dangerous, now the honorary guest at the town's fall festival. People weren't coming for Walter. They weren't even coming for Shadow. They were coming for the feeling that bloomed quietly between the two of them, the rare kind of love that asks nothing but to stay. When winter arrived, frost laced the window panes of Walter's cabin. Shadow moved slower, slept longer, but his eyes still held the same steady light, the kind that once led Walter out of fire, out of nightmares, out of despair. One evening, Walter sat by the fire, hand resting gently on Shadow's head. "We didn't win anything, did we?" Shadow blinked. The tail brushed the floor just once. "But I think you knew that wasn't the point." The next morning, Walter received a letter from someone he'd never met. "I used to think strength meant hiding everything. But watching you in Shadow taught me that the bravest thing I can do is let someone see my pain, and stay anyway. Thank you for not walking out when the whole room turned away." Walter folded the letter and placed it next to the plaque on the mantel. Shadow, hero without command. Shadow never needed a medal, never needed a title, never needed a stage. He just needed a porch, a place to lie down, and someone willing to sit beside him until the world felt safe again. And if anyone ever asks you, do people still believe in goodness? Tell them about the old man at the end of the road, and the dog who didn't need applause to matter. Tell them about the little girl who whispered, "He understands everything," and about the boy who finally spoke because a dog stayed. Because sometimes you don't need music. You don't need lights. You just need a scarred man, a quiet dog, and a town willing to learn. That love never performs. It just shows up and stays. And so, no trophy was needed. No ribbon. No encore. Just a quiet bench, a scarred man, and a dog who never left his side. If you watched until now, thank you. You've seen something that goes beyond narrative. A living reminder that we don't need to be extraordinary to be remembered. We just need to be there when it matters most. This wasn't merely a story. It was a mirror, held up to all of us who've ever felt forgotten, overlooked, or quietly brave. As Maya Angelou once said, people forget what you said, forget what you did, but never forget how you made them feel. Shadow didn't need to speak. He simply made people feel safe again. Tell us in the comments, what does loyalty mean to you? And if this story moved you, please subscribe to the Story Atelier. Every single subscriber is not just a number. It's a heartbeat, a soul saying, keep creating. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we can continue to craft stories that heal, inspire, and remember what truly matters. Because sometimes a quiet story can change everything.